Okay, welcome everyone. Happy Monday, 420 here. I don't even know what day it is in this whole crazy pandemic that we've been living through, but welcome to the Elevate Academy. This is a place for student athletes, parents, their families, and anyone, coaches, people who love sports. We're bringing in great guests for people to get together, learn about sports, learn about leadership, learn about different topics, and it's been so much fun to get this thing launched. We do focus on the complete student athlete, mind, body, game, and life. And that's really what it's all about. We want you to help take care of you both on and off the field. And today we have an incredible guest. We have John O'Grady. John is a former Division I athlete. He played at West Point, the big Black Knights up at Mikey Stadium. We had some battles with them up there at West Point. He's done multiple combat tours. He's a two-time Bronze Star recipient. He's got combat action and parachutist badge. He served along the Delta Force, Navy SEALs, and Army Rangers. He led 500 soldiers in combat. His unit was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, which is the highest award that's given out to units for extraordinary heroism in the face of an armed enemy. He's advised the Secretary of the Army, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and other government C-suite leaders. He provides confidential advice and consultation for executives, athletic coaches, and their teams. Welcome, John O'Grady. How you doing, John?
Dave, great. Thanks for having me. And more importantly, thanks for this forum and the incredible guests that you have on this. It is so important outside of, the pandemic, but now that we've got it, I think people get dialed into, the things that you bring to this forum in a way that's far more important and far more palpable to them.
Well,
So,
I appreciate it. I had to wear my red, white, and blue hat for you today. When we had to pick colors, it was pretty easy. We said American flag, simple as that.
There you go.
And that's what we go with. So we got the red, white, and blue. We got the stars and stripes in there. But it's first of all, let me start off by saying this, and I encourage all you athletes out there, whoever's watching, every time you see someone who is wearing a military uniform or they're retired and they're military, here's the first thing you have to say: thank you for your service. So John, thank you so much for your service. It's people like John and his teammates from West Point and the graduates and all the people there that keep this country safe. It enables us to do the things that we're able to do because we have people like John who are literally there making sure that we're safe. So John, thank you so much for your service. It's truly appreciated.
Well, I appreciate that, and I fully accept it as well. And what I would like to offer, though, as well, just pull the thread on that notion of service a little bit more. It struck me when I was in Afghanistan and I saw many Afghan civilians from the government. I saw people from our own government, USAID and others. I had a college professor, took a one-year sabbatical. She was an anthropologist and spent 6 months with my unit because she was so passionate about trying to just figure out a way to help. And what I started to realize from that was, while the 1% who serves in uniform gets the credit of, hey, thanks for your service, we really need to open our mental apertures to really what service means and how to go about serving, right? And if there's nothing that comes out of this particular crisis that we're in, I would hope we all get a greater understanding of what service really means and how each and every one of us, quite frankly, can serve in a way that's powerful and meaningful. And it doesn't have to be in uniform service. It can, right? But if you want to go out and think about it, a registered nurse right now, a first responder, a person in a medical field who's working on figuring out this problem, to leading in government, so I just think we need to open our mental apertures to what it means to serve. And so to your young audience out there, I would just say absolutely what Dave said, and make sure that you're serving one day so that people can come up to you and say, thanks for your service.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. And one thing someone said recently too said, "Hey, if you're thinking about what your future career might want to be, well, take a look right now. Look at who the essential workers are in this country right now. The people who are literally keeping this going." So, it's an awesome thing, and I'm not patting myself on the back at all. But every night at 6:45, we go down to Huntington Hospital. And I do a lot of work with Huntington Hospital. It's such a great hospital, community hospital. They're been phenomenal for me. And we go out there at 6:45 because we have the nurses who are coming on, we have the nurses who are coming off, and we're clanging pans, we're beeping our horns, and just thanking them. And if everyone can do that for 15 minutes a day and maybe pick up some of the other shifts, it's great hearing from the nurses and the doctors saying how nice it is to feel thanked. So simple thing,
Yep.
simple thing. And
Yeah,
we could all be doing that.
absolutely.
So let's take it back a little bit. You grew up on Long Island,
Yep.
right? And how did you end up at West Point?
Yeah, great question. I was a younger of two kids. We grew up in Merrick, spent our whole life in the house in 1824 Etna Place. And
Sounds a lot like 1883 Chester Drive in East Meadow.
there you go, right? Right.
One town away.
And I had the benefit of being a younger brother. My brother Tom also played football and lacrosse in high school, and then went on to play lacrosse at Nassau Community, won a national championship there, and then went on to Loyola and Adelphi. But a lot of his older friends, I was just hanging around. I was the little brother, right? And one of them, actually two of them, ended up going to West Point. And what I saw was they would come back, on Christmas and some other things.
Right.
And, I'm like, well, these guys still can kind of have fun. They still seem like they're the same guys. Maybe this West Point thing isn't such a bad deal after all. And my dad made it clear that, hey, look, we don't have any money for college, so, figure it out. You can either work part-time and hustle and do like your brother did, or figure it out. And so, that's what got me interested at the West Point. And then really after that, it was a couple of good games. A couple of good games at the right time. And next thing you know, I'm at West Point playing lacrosse.
Well, it's interesting. You and I didn't talk about this prior, but I originally verbally committed to West Point in my senior year.
Oh, wow.
And so 1985, Army was playing Air Force, first night game ever at Mikey Stadium, televised, national audience. And I was getting recruited for both football and lacrosse, and I came up there on a Friday, and I stayed with the lacrosse captain on Friday night, and then after the game on Saturday, I stayed with the football captain. On Sunday, both coaches hit me on Sunday and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I'm coming," and I was excited to go. And then and this is why I tell all the kids who are out there going through the recruiting process, you have to step on campuses, you have to see a school. And I went on my last recruiting trip to Brown, and I literally fell in love with the place, and I was like, wow, this is where I'm supposed to be. But my mom said the same thing that your dad said. She said, Dave, we have no money. So I don't even know how, we're going to pay for Brown. So that's another story at another time. But we could have been teammates. We could have been teammates at West Point at that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and the funny thing is I had a lot of friends who went to West Point. One of my guy who's a year older than me, John Kilgannon, from East Meadow. He went to West Point, and I saw John on my recruiting trip there. But Jimmy Daly, we had some battles against Holy Trinity. His older brother went there. Well, Pete Mavoides from Huntington. So a whole crew of guys. But back in the day, that crew from I'm going to go back to because 85, if I'm right, I'm pretty sure. I think in 1985, West Point went to the Final Four.
Yeah, they may have. It might have been 85 or 84, somewhere in there.
Yeah, but that string of years. I mean, while we were there, my first 2 years, we lost the first two games, freshman and sophomore year, 1-goal games, battles. I think one of the games was in overtime, and then we finally took it to West Point my junior year. We finally got on the victory board up at Mikey Stadium, and boy, did that feel good. It's just different. We used to say when you're playing Brown lacrosse is we said Brown State. The teams that we played that really matched us like that were West Point, because you guys played such a tough physical game. So take me back to West Point, and because one of the things that it blows me away is the leaders that come out of West Point. And obviously it's a military academy, but still the leadership that comes out of West Point, there's just something in the water there. What is it about West Point?
Yeah, so I think first there's a little bit of the self-selection, right, initially, and there's a pretty good culling along the way. It really does take a fair amount of grit, and actually it was just a recent book that was published. I want to say it was Angela Duckworth. I could be wrong on that, but she actually studied West Point cadets to figure out what was one of the most predictive things about getting through and succeeding there. And she brought it down to grit, which was an essential part of it. And so in order to matriculate all the way through there, you have to have a certain amount of grit. The other thing is they just constantly immerse you in leadership experiences. And so it's a constant, it really is. It's like a Petra dish, it's an experiment, and you just keep experimenting and failing and experimenting and failing and experimenting and failing and experimenting. And, oh, that worked. And then you go on that cycle again.
Well, what's really interesting
out of there with this incredible, experiences.
What's really interesting is what you just said. And I loved what you just said. And I don't even know if you meant it, but what John just said was experiment and failing, experiment and failing, experiment and failing. Not once did he say experiment and losing.
Right.
And I think especially when we're talking about athletics and life, because they mirror each other so much, is we can't be afraid to fail. We have to be able to get up. And I think that's an awesome thing that you just said, is that's what it is all about. Yeah.
My buddy Adam Silva, also Army lacrosse, just wrote an article, and he called it The Success of Failure. And, he talks about that as well. And so the way I think about failure is just a bunch of micro spins, if you will, inside a longer process. And that process is growth. Okay. So really in the aggregate, in the larger picture, there really is no failure, because you're growing. In the micro spins, sure, we could call it failure, and that's fine. Put whatever name you want to it. But I know that the process, the journey, there's nothing failing about that.
Well, you talked about how West Point, immerses, kids and, young men and women. And by the way, also super congrats to the West Point women's lacrosse team, who went from literally a club program a few years ago. A couple good friends of mine are coaching up there. Shannon Gilroy, I'm right here in Northport. That's where we're broadcasting from. Shannon Gilroy, Northport legend, really good friends with their family.
Daughter, I think, right? Bobby?
Yeah, just great people. But what a job they've done. But the men and women that are going there, they have this immersion of leadership.
You bet.
You as a leadership coach, as someone who's trying to help people with leadership, how do you go about teaching leadership?
Yeah, so it's words that I use over and over again, and it's got to be with intention, and it's got to be with purpose, right? Lots of people do these one-off leadership things, and that's kind of cool. And I do that. I go up, I'll give a little pitch about leadership, and I'll say,
right,
a couple of things, and that lasts as long as the next text or social media ping hits the kid's phone, right? And maybe one of them takes something away from it. But if you're not going to be intentional and purposeful about leadership development, right? Because it's a practice. It's not unlike any other thing that you want to get good at. You've got to practice. It's wall ball. It's reps and sets, And quite frankly, I'm not done. 30 years of practicing leadership, and I still am doing it. I'm still having conversations with folks like you, listening to the folks that you have on, reading, studying, reflecting. It's about reps and sets and practice. That is the number one message that I try to get through to coaches who are considering hiring me to bring me in. You know, I just let them know. There's been a few who I've not worked with because I knew they weren't going to allow the intention and time that was required to go ahead and get a return on investment.
Right, make a difference.
That's unfortunate, right? Because, you know, I'll talk to every single coach will tell you, you know, so I go in, let's say you're a prospective client. I'll go, hey, coach, so look, I got a great idea for you. Forget about captains and forget about leadership. It's overrated. And you'd probably throw me right out of the office, and rightfully so, right? Because look at any natty presser, you know, hey, it was about the leadership in the locker room, it was about the senior leadership. Okay, now let's put that thought for a second in the parking lot. Hey, coach, talk to me about how you recruit. Oh, well. All right, talk to me about X's and O's. Oh, let me whiteboard for hours, right? Talk to me about strength and conditioning, on and on and on. And they will tell you in unbelievable detail, you got to cut them off, about how much time, effort, and energy they put into all those things.
Sure.
And I say, hey, great, that's awesome, coach. I said, now talk to me. Leadership. How much intention and attention do you give to leadership development, character development inside your program? And usually there's like a pause. And most coaches get it at that moment. And they realize, I can't talk to this guy much more than about 45 seconds to a minute.
Right.
But I could about all this other stuff that was important to me.
Well, you know what's interesting, John, is we did a survey a couple months ago prior to all this happening to NCAA men's and women's coaches, Division 1, 2, and 3. And we gave them 8 different characteristics, player characteristics. And we asked them to rank them 1 through 8 on a scale of 1 being, you know, the highest. Right. And what's interesting is leadership was in there. And leadership, and this is for recruiting purposes,
sure,
one of the lowest scored of all the categories we had. Coachability was actually number 1, but leadership was down at 7 or 8, depending on men and the male and female coaches who responded. And it got me thinking about it and said, you know, how can coaches judge a kid's leadership? You know, where can they literally say, you know what, I think this kid's a future leader? Because you may see it by watching a game.
Right.
You know, I don't know if you're going to see it in a camp or a clinic situation. You may see it in a game when that kid has to play a certain role. But how can these coaches really determine, hey, you know what I love about this kid? They're a leader. Right.
Yeah, so great question again. And I'll offer kind of 2 ideas,
sure,
because that question literally could be the remainder of this entire session. But one of the things I talk to coaches about, and I've done this as well with coaches that I work with, I say, hey, coach, show me your leadership depth chart.
Wow.
Every coach could show me, you know, starting attack, starting quarterback. Heck, I had a professional coach talk to me about the quarterback, right? And the number 4 quarterback on their depth chart was a guy who played quarterback and was an All-American in high school. Hadn't played the position since. But that coach knew that and had thought through that with that much, again, intention and purpose, right? You can pick it up on a theme here, listeners, intention and purpose, huge. To do that. So the first thing you can do is sit down with your assistants, maybe quiz or ask or have some conversations with teachers, other people that these kids come in contact with, and start to just try to at least develop what your leadership depth chart might look like. It's amazing what all of a sudden the discussions that start to come about. Well, right. Are we talking about things they do now or things that I think they have the potential to do in the future? Great question, coach. You tell me.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and so just that alone is one way. The other way that I find hugely helpful, again, is figuring out these micro situations that you could put these kids in to demonstrate, practice leadership, and fail, maybe, right? Back to my West Point experience. And really throughout the Army, it's how we develop leaders throughout the Army. And then what you can do there is as well, when you put them in those situations, you can also then start to use some of the feedback you get from that to develop what might look like a leadership council that has different groups represented, right? So those are just two kind of key ways I would offer.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, I wrote that down immediately, leadership depth chart. And the thing that got me thinking about that right away, though, leadership depth chart is, you said throw out captains or whatever. And, there are, each team obviously has captains on their team. And, in the younger ages, in teams that I coach, we would always rotate captains, because I think what it does is it gives different kids the ability to say, I get to be in charge a little bit, and I get to be a leader, and this is how we're going to do it while I'm the captain for the week or the game captain or whatever. And I think that's a great thing. But when you start getting into high school and college and, competitive and obviously beyond, there's, I guess a little bit of a debate. Do you let teams select captains as a coach, or do you select the captains as a coach? Do you have teams vote, or is it a combination of both? Have you seen anything where, you've experienced that and how captains are selected?
Absolutely. It's one of the first questions I'll ask once I've been, brought on or hired, if that isn't actually part of the reason why I was brought on. So, again, this is what I offer, right? So I'm giving it all out for free, folks. It's because of the COVID. It's one of the benefits. The first thing I'll say is, hey, coach, what attributes do you think you're looking for? What do you want your captain to do, to model? What type of behaviors, right? And so we'll work on that list. The coach and I, the assistants, et cetera, might even ask some previous former captains as well. And you get that to about 10, right? 10 things. And then what you do is you turn that into a question. And the question becomes a 10-question survey that's given to the entire team that says, hey, which teammate is best going to bring challenges to the coaching staff and represent your needs? Fill in the top 3. Which teammate do you trust the most? Fill in the top 3. Which teammate demonstrates the greatest resilience in difficult times in a positive way? Fill out the top 3. Which teammate's going to call out a fellow teammate in a positive way when they aren't being living up to the standards that we've established for ourselves, right? And so now what you get, when you do that one thing, just that one thing, you're going to learn more, coach, about your program than you would have ever in any other activity.
I hope every coach who's listening, and I hope every player who's listening, is going to take that back to your teams and implement this, because that is awesome. It immediately got me thinking to some of the captains that I had when I was in college. And one of them recently, I actually wrote him and just said to him, and I'll tell you, Walt Cataldo, he was an All-American safety in football, and he was captain at Brown in lacrosse, and from Billerica, Mass. And Walt Cataldo as a captain, to me, was just the best. He was someone that you would literally, if he asked you to do something, you would do it because Walt asked you. You trusted him, you cared about him, and you knew he would do the same for you. So love your questions.
Yeah, and again, those questions are going to be different for each coach, and what you get is as these kids start filling in the top 3, right? Maybe you see one kid that you thought as a coach was potentially, somebody you put slap the C on, but it rarely shows up on any of those, right? Or the kid you wasn't even tracking is all of a sudden he's getting peppered all throughout there, right? Or she. Right. You also learn about, okay, well, which players see which people in what ways. You know, and if you're remotely tuned in as a student athlete, which I would hope you would be, and you think maybe one day you want to be a captain, and let's say you're a freshman or a sophomore on that program and you're filling this out, well, guess what, coach? You just gave every player on your team a word roadmap to start working on very specific things so that one day they might become a captain.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's what we talked about at the beginning of the show. We talked about mind, body, game, life, you know, and the mind part of it, the leadership and all that, that falls right under this. And, you know, right now, you know, people are asking me, hey, what can my kids be doing, you know, training and everything like this. And one of the things we keep telling them is work on the mind stuff too. You know, go increase your lacrosse IQ. One of the books that has been mentioned, I think, on every single show is Captain's Class. It's an unbelievable book, and it really it shows what are the best teams in the history of sports, no matter what the sport was. What are the best teams have in common? And they all had incredible captains. And what is that? That's leadership.
Right. And you know, if you're a coach out there, here's the other thing that I would offer, right? So we often we'll again, we all recognize the importance of the captain. This book, there's an entire book about it. Okay, we slap a C on a kid's chest, and then what else have we provided that kid, other than maybe a pat on the butt and say, "Go get him, Tiger." Now, the one thing I do know about leadership, I don't care what age, our age, right, or young kids, peer or near peer leadership is the hardest leadership on the face of the planet.
Yeah.
Yet again, we slap a C on a kid's chest, say, go get him, Tiger, and we do nothing to prepare that kid with intention and purpose to give them the tools to do the things we ask of them to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, that's the same thing. I think, you know, when you're getting into the real world and you're getting into a job, you know, if you're not provided with this is what's expected of you, how are you going to do your job well? So it's the same thing with these captains. It was interesting. I had Kylie O'Miller on a week and a half ago, you know, arguably one of the best players in the world, all-time NCAA scoring leader. I asked her that question. What was it like to go from being a player one year to being a volunteer assistant coach and coaching now some of the kids who you just played with?
Right.
And the thing that she said right off the bat was, she said, I think these players, they trusted me and they respected me.
That's huge. It's huge. This whole notion about captains and not being prepared and some other things. I was very fortunate to have a conversation with just a really incredible human being, let alone a hockey player. Megan Dugan, who was the captain for the women's gold medal winning team. It was one of the best hockey games, instant classic, went to a shootout and they beat the Canadians. So she was the captain of that team. She was also the captain of the Wisconsin team that she played for, right?
Badgers.
Yep, the Badgers, you bet. And phenomenal run there. And I was getting into the conversation like we're having here. And, you know, I started talking about just certain techniques and different things that I share with people that I work with. And she was like, you know, in my entire time of being a captain, I never got any of that. And I wonder just how much more effective I could have been for my fellow teammates and the program. Now, granted, she's already achieved unbelievable team and individual success.
But that's the best thing is that when you have someone like that. I mean, listen, someone asked me, and I said it the other day, someone said, Dave, why are you doing this? What is this Elevate Academy all about? And I literally look back and go, if someone had given me a roadmap, and I played 3 sports in college, I was very successful, went on to play professional lacrosse in both indoor and outdoor leagues and, you know, love the game. But I think if I had a roadmap as a young student athlete that said, do these things and you're going to be that much better, I would have followed them to a T. So all you athletes out there and parents, that's what this is. This is bringing my collective 40 plus years of experience in, and bringing the best guests onto this show so that we can help your families and your kids be the best that they can be. That's what this is about.
Right.
Absolutely. And when Megan says that, it's like, that's exactly it. When you said that, it's like, that's what I want.
Right. Yeah.
For all of them. Let's skip here for a second.
Sure.
And because I know some people are going to want to hear this. You served in combat, 2 Bronze Stars. What is that like to receive that Bronze Star after the fact?
Yeah, it's incredible humility. It's like anything else, even though it's an individual award, it's not earned individually at all, right? And so, you get, the kid up there who wins the Heisman, and the first thing he does is he talks about his teammates, he talks about his parents, talks about his upbringing, talks about the environment that he was put in, talks about incredible just breaks and opportunities all the way up until that moment where that honor is bestowed upon them. And so, that's really what I think about. That's what that moment was like for me, and always will be. Not about me at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then your unit gets the, the presidential unit citation. Right. Then that's got to be almost like that's even better.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So I'm in command of a 500 roughly person unit. We deploy to Afghanistan. We're put in a space, geographic space, roughly 8,000 square kilometers. We break that team out into about 5 or 6, roughly 100 to 80 person chunks and disperse them throughout that battle space, if you will. We realize, hey, that we ain't enough, fellas, right? So we very quickly start to partner with people, whether it be the phenomenal Norwegian military element that was in that same space, Afghan local security forces, tribal warlords who had the same interests that we did. And what you realize is, everybody's talking about this, oh, wow, we're in this distributed environment now because of, the pandemic and stuff. And I'm like, hey, man, I did that for a year. I know what leading in a distributed environment is. And I'm talking to a number of the corporate executives right now about how to go about maybe doing that. So, but to then have them operate at such an incredibly high level, again, was just, an unbelievable experience. And I could tell you, the nation who gives their sons and daughters can be incredibly proud of that just as much as I am.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, it's absolutely incredible. When we're talking about, leadership development and just becoming better, what are some of your takeaways from literally combat that you can reference those takeaways into because listen, I hear it all the time. I hear professional sports where, they're interviewing someone's like, we're going into war. Like, you're not really going into war. You playing a game and you're getting paid a lot of money to play that game.
Right.
So, but how can we take those combat situations and the lessons that you're learning with working with, young men and women who are looking for your leadership? How can we bring that into sports and business?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that I would offer. The first one would be, what's your role as a leader, right? And so, combat can be a very stressful situation, no doubt. It can elicit feelings of fear, right? Kind of sounds a little bit like what, corporate leaders are experiencing right now. And so what I like to do lots of times for me conceptually, it helps me to understand and then articulate and explain, which is another key component of leadership. That's one of the fundamental things you do as a leader. And so I thought through, okay, so if there's fear, if there's going to be situations where there's fear, what is fear? And for me, fear is anxiety plus uncertainty right? Anxiety plus uncertainty equals fear. And then what you start figuring out is, okay, well, how do I buy down anxiety or uncertainty, right? In corporate space, that's one way, right? And in the athletic space, it's another way, you know? But think it through it that way, and think it through how you can, in little micro chunks, buy down anxiety and uncertainty. Then you aggregate that over time and fear dissipates. And so what you get now is you go from a state of distress, right, back into eustress, which is actually a healthy level of stress. It's actually,
Right.
it's what gets us up in the morning. It's what, causes the lion to go out and chase, prey, right? So that's one thing. The other one I would offer, and there's a whole host of them, but I'll stop with this one, would be the understanding between optimal performance and peak performance. Okay. Lots of times we want our, athletes to constantly be on that high hum. Okay. Well, over the course of a season, or over the course of a 12-month deployment, that's just not realistic. And
Sure.
so understanding the difference between optimal performance and peak performance and how context really impacts that. And so the analogy I would give is, hey, my optimal performance while swimming in a swimming pool, an Olympic swimming pool, is going to look a whole lot different than my optimal swimming performance if I'm out at Jones Beach and I'm getting pulled out by an undertow.
Right.
They're not going to look the same. And
Yeah.
if and understand that, coach, right? It's okay to have optimal performance that you are looking at just, and going, wait a minute, O'Grady doesn't swim like that normally. What? I've seen him in the pool 100 times. Well, what's the context?
Right.
So,
Well, the other thing too is, you talk about service and ways of giving back. I do want to give a shout out to my good friend, Harry Jacobs, who was the president of Long Island Metropolitan Lacrosse Foundation. Harry helps run here on Long Island the Shootout for Soldiers event, and Long Island has been kicking butt the last couple of years. I think we're #1 in the country with the most amount of money raised, and it's 24 hours of lacrosse. And that's another way that you can give back and help, because, when we have veterans, I was talking about it this morning. My dad, who I was estranged from the time I was 7 years old, he was alcoholic, he was abusive and everything. They say, okay, why was he that way? At 17 years old, he was a United States Marine Corps flamethrower in Iwo Jima. Yeah. So you think about PTSD and the effects that combat have on our veterans, and we need to be doing a hell of a lot more for our veterans in that space.
Yeah, I would say, mental health period across our entire country needs a lot of help in terms of being able to provide, whether it be a service member or otherwise, right? Because trauma is a very individual thing. How people process it is different. Thankfully, what I know and what the statistics tell us is that most veterans who go through these crucible events,
right,
it's actually is a period of great growth for them, and so there is a post-traumatic growth as well, but we do need, to your point, where that growth hasn't occurred and it's actually become a detriment. We need that support as well, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I read an article recently, and it's something that's really near and dear to me. You've seen and this is just the rates, I think, from 2009 to 2016, teenage boys suicide rates are up 64%, and girls suicide rates are up 116%. And it's like, come on, we need to do a better job. And I think one of the benefits of sports and what we're bringing to the table is gives kids something to focus on, to love. And I don't care if it's sports, maybe it's music, maybe it's science, but we need to make sure that we're helping kids find their true passion and what they want to do in life so that they can make an impact and then make a meaningful impact. It took me a long time to get into doing what I'm doing now. And I kept on literally saying, what does God put me on this earth for? What does God put me on this earth for? And then, one day it kind of clicked. It's like, I'm supposed to be helping young kids be the best that they can be. And it's like, I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I think what's really important is we need to help kids in all types of roles, whether it be helping them with leadership, because not everyone's going to be a captain, but that doesn't mean you can't be a leader.
Yeah. And I would even go so far. That's a great point. And again, when I'm having these discussions with different coaches, whether it be a professional or down, right? I'll ask the question, I'm like, hey, coach, so, who are your leaders? And then I go, I'm going to ask the question just one more time, coach. Who are your leaders? Oh, now, I'm setting it up. It's a setup question, okay? I'm like, hey, coach, every single person associated with your program is a leader, whether you realize it or not.
Right.
The only two questions are they leading in the direction that you want them to lead? And are they effective? But every single person in your organization is a leader. So.
Right. Well, one of the questions that we had from one of the viewers is the immersion in the leadership exercises. Are they forced like reps at practices, or are they just making sure the opportunity is there to take advantage of? I guess this is going back to your comment about West Point and that, you're constantly immersed in leadership. Yeah.
So great question. And it's actually both, from the West Point model and even from the Army model. And so, one of the ways you can do this inside your program and things, again, that I offer as, when I work with coaches, first thing I tell them is, hey, look, I know I'm not the head coach, so all I'm going to do is ask you a bunch of questions, and I'm going to provide a bunch of recommendations. That's it, But the recommendation I offer is, so in the United States Army, and there's science behind this if people want to go into organizational leadership and look at some stuff, okay? But in the United States Army, the squad is anywhere from about 7 to like 11 people, roughly. It depends on what type of unit, et cetera. But there's a reason for that, because it's understood, especially at the lower levels, that the span of control one person can have over another really starts to dissipate at about the 1 to 5 ratio, okay? And so the squad is even broken down into 2 sections of equal people. And so I offer that principle for coaches to implement inside their team. And so you can have these accountability pods or sections, right? Where you're putting one kid who's sort of kind of in charge of like 3 to 4 others. Might be a sophomore over a couple of freshmen with a senior in there or whatever, right? And you give them these little spaces, and it's like, okay, hey, I'm not going to check to see if everybody, did X, Y, or Z. I want you to let, the other person know, and then they're going to let me know.
Right. Well, I love that. I love it.
What you do is
you're developing multiple levels of leaders. Is the first thing. It's like, Jenny Levy talked about that when she was on the show, where she divides her team up into 4 teams, and they have all these different competitions that they have. I love that. Little things like that. I also looked at it this year with, my captains this year at the high school level, where my assistant coaches and we talked about captains, and we do want, do we have a captain on attack or on offense? Do we have someone in the midfield, defense, et cetera? Do we have someone who plays that key leadership role, in different parts of the field for us?
Right. You bet. Yeah. So there's all sorts of ways to do it. And when you do that, again, you give them some of these reps and sets. You also, where if things do get a little out of whack, or, again, they have these micro fails, you're containing it to a relatively small group of your organization too, right? And so it's easier to go in there. It's easier to right the ship again, get everybody back on course, versus, again, we wait until, hey, you're now a captain. And, if the captain keeps screwing stuff up, I mean, that has an effect on the entire team, right?
Sure.
So, yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, even from the standpoint of, I think one of the things too is, how often are you having, you think about business, right? In business, I think sometimes we have too many meetings, but I had different bosses when I was at Merrill Lynch. One of my favorite bosses I had there, Tom Fickinger. Tom was not big on these long, lengthy meetings. And I think because he was an athlete, he was a quarterback at Penn State. And it was like, let's accomplish what we need to accomplish as quickly as we can, and then go execute. And then I had other bosses where I felt we had meetings to have meetings and things like that. However, I think it's really important from a leadership standpoint that you have some check-ins and intra-season meetings with your captains to say, hey, how are things going? What's the vibe? How are we feeling out there? And also, isn't it the perfect opportunity to give feedback to the job that they're doing?
Yeah, not only the job they're doing, but hey, coach, the job you're doing. Imagine that, right? I recommend, me personally, if you're not having an intentional conversation, I think at the collegiate level with your captains, at least 3 times a week, I would offer you're not giving them the quality touches
Right.
that they deserve. And oh, by the way, you're missing some opportunities to learn some things yourself.
I'll tell you a really cool thing. One of the moms on my team, she's head of a large insurance company, and she's basically head of HR for all of them. And she brought something up to me that's really important. We were having a conversation about mentors, how important mentors are. And she started a program, Janice Seamat, this is out to you. Janice started a program where she was bringing in millennials to mentor C-suite executives, because it's like, this is how we want you to work with us. And I'm like, wow, that is just so smart. It's really reversing it to be like, we're millennials over here. You're 50, 60 years old over here. There's this huge gap in between us. Let us show you better ways for us to work. I'm like, that's leadership right there. Great job, Janice.
You bet. That is, yeah. Hats off to her. It's interesting when I go inside some of these corporate spaces. What I find is lots of times that executive actually kind of gets it on some level, right? And what you find is lots of times that middle management, there's 2 types usually of middle management or middle leaders.
Right.
The types that act as a shield, and the types that act as a conduit or a conductor of energy, right? So you can either shield energy, or you can be that thing that facilitates energy to flow up and down, in and out, through. And lots of times the managers and those middle folks don't do it don't do it intentionally. But inside your leadership organization and your space, you really got to think through, how am I ensuring that my middle leaders aren't that shield, but they're more the conduit and the conductor of energy.
Well, it's funny. You stay on that energy thing right now. I'm writing 2 specific notes here. I was listening to a podcast with Brendan Bouchard the other day, and he's the author of Atomic Habits. He's awesome. And he said a great thing. He said, a power plant does not have energy. A power plant creates energy. Mm-hmm. And we, as individuals, we are power plants.
Yep.
So we can create levels of energy. And I love that. It was like, it made you really think about it. Power plants don't have energy. They create energy.
Yeah.
And then what do? Is they push out that energy.
You bet. Ideally, right?
Yeah.
You could be a dysfunctional power plant and do nothing but take in energy, right?
That's John Gordon's great book, The Energy Bus, and
right.
An energy vampire.
Yep.
No energy vampires here, please. We don't want any of them. But the next thing that I wanted to talk about, I was having a debate the other day with a friend of mine. And this was after I was on someone else's podcast, and he listened to it. And he said, Dave, you're out there telling kids to do wall ball and, do this at practice and do that at practice. Like, is that really going to have any impact on them? And I said, yeah, absolutely it's going to have an impact on them. And because my view is, just like you do in the military, and obviously I was never in the military, so I don't know all the details, but getting an idea, a lot of stuff that you're doing is repetition, 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 so that you can do something in your sleep, whether it's cleaning your rifle, and it's repetition, repetition. But when kids are doing this type of stuff and they're repeating it, this is what I said to them: why do it and have that repetition? Because they want to feel comfortable with it. When they're comfortable with it, it builds their confidence. When their confidence is up, they're willing to try more things. So that's why I like the kids to be repetitive in their preparation. What are your thoughts on that from with a military background?
Yeah. So what I would, again, the two things that kind of come to mind for me in this case are intention and attention, right? And so, because I see kids doing it. I see it. And I was standing there, I'm watching practices. I'm around sports fields all the time too. So it doesn't just have to be with wall ball. It could be with any kind of drill, right? You can reinforce a bunch of really poor habits too, right? So in the military, we use task. Right. Okay, so task, conduct wall ball, condition. Okay, the conditions can be any number of conditions. Conditions will always change. Standard never changes, right? Here's where I want you to stick, feet, etc., right? So task and standard never change. The conditions we do those things in can change. And then what you find is you may need to come up with new tasks, like, oh, okay, so this isn't meant to stifle creativity. That's the first pushback I get, right? Oh, sure. But you're just one of these, throw it overhand kind of guys. Yeah, I am. But I'm also if the condition is appropriate, behind the back. Right. I'm that guy too. But knowing why you're doing the drill, the intention behind it, and then the attention you afford it makes all the difference in my business between life and death in some cases, and in the collegiate space between being an all-conference and being an all-American, winning a natty or not.
One of your teammates from the Black Knights, Jimmy Daly, has a question, and Jimmy Daly's question is, what are some methods to use to help a kid that may be failing as a leader without replacing him or tossing him aside?
Say that. Could you repeat that one more time?
What are some things that you could do to help a kid who's failing as a leader instead of just replacing him or tossing him aside?
Yeah. Okay. Well, see, you threw me off because I thought the first question was going to ask if I remember driving back from West Point Prep School in his yellow Pinto on Fridays, because we went to prep
those
school.
Pintos exploded when they hit you from behind. Come on, Jimmy Daly.
And I was always in the back seat. Anyway, yeah, Jimmy Daly. Wow. So here's what I would offer. Ideal, look, there may be certain situations where you just can't get around it, right? And that should be a pretty drastic act of commission, right? Where that kid actually goes outside the lines. Ideally, what you're doing, though, is first and foremost yourself as the coach, right? Look, when you got anybody else below you who isn't performing the manner that you had expected them to, the first questions need to come back to yourself. So did I pick the wrong kid? Did I not prepare them properly enough? Am I giving them too much responsibility? Do they feel overwhelmed? Is there something going on in the home situation? They're distracted, right?
Yeah, so it gets back to that feedback, those check-ins that we were talking about earlier.
100%. And so to the extent you can, try to understand those things and do it from a position, and this is very important, do it from a position when you enter into that conversation with the kid, do it from a position of genuine, healthy curiosity. And you almost have to overplay that to the point where it almost doesn't even feel like you're being authentic, okay? But you are, because you're being intentional about it. So intentionality and authenticity can actually coexist.
I love it.
And then, hopefully you could start to figure out some things where you can start helping that kid and giving them the tools to excel.
So good. So good. So we always end the Elevate Academy with 3 questions.
Okay.
So the first 3 questions that we have for you, the one is, you kind of already answered, but I'm gonna give you another crack at it because I think I know how you would answer. But questions from Sean Moran. Sean used to be the head of marketing and ad sales for Viacom, professional basketball player, and he said, what is the fundamental aspect of leadership that you teach? What is the one fundamental aspect?
That's a hard one because I always have difficulties with the one thing.
Yeah, no, that's hard. But
yeah, I would.
You're saying that you mentioned a couple times, like intention and attention. I'm like,
Yeah.
God, I wrote that 3 different times.
Yeah, that's the way in which you practice it. I would offer influence. At the end of the day, a leader is about influence and behavior modification. Your own as a leader and those who you are leading.
Wow, love it. Now,
I got to write a book one day, Dave.
Yeah. So John, now what is your question? So our next guest is Don Saladino. So Don is literally the trainer to the stars. He trains, Scarlett Johansson. He trains Ryan
Gosling.
Yeah, Ryan Gosling. It's like, he trains all of these superstars, and he's an amazing job. And plus, he's an awesome hockey player, great guy, and he's literally on the cover of Men's Health and Fitness magazines.
Dude's ripped.
Absolutely jacked, but he's super positive. What's your question for Don Saladino?
Okay, wow, that's great. So I would imagine the folks that he's working with, a lot of them come with maybe some big egos. And so I think my question to him would be, how do you still connect? How do you navigate leading them? Because he is serving in a leadership role when you confront somebody with that big ego.
Wow, that's awesome. Love that. Well, we will hear from Don on Wednesday. Last question for you from the Elevate Academy. And to me, this is my favorite question because everything that we do here is to try to help the people who are listening. But for you personally, what's the best piece of advice you ever got, and who gave it to you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's advice. Well, it was advice, right? This is the importance of writing stuff down because it actually has a chance of, living on well beyond yourself. And I was reminded by it when I was listening to a fellow Army teammate, Eric Minio, doing a session earlier this week. And when I went to become the chief of collective training at the United States Army, in charge for literally the collective training for the entirety of the United States Army, I had a business card made, and I took this very quote that he also reminded me of. And the quote is from a Greek lyric poet from the Greek island of Paros back in about 650 BC. And he said, "We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training." And if you're a young athlete out there, right, you maybe have great expectations for yourself. There may be external expectations that get thrown at you. Don't worry about any of that, man or young lady, right? The level of your training is going to dictate where you are and where you're going to go. And it has nothing to do with your expectations or any other expectations that are placed on you by anybody else.
Well, listen, this has been unbelievable for me, to have literally someone like yourself, 2-time Bronze Star recipient, the President's Unit Award, all these things, but also someone who, has played the game and is now literally helping change corporate America, teams, and things like that. You're just doing an awesome job, John, and we appreciate you so much. We appreciate your service. But this is what the Elevate Academy is about, people. This is like people like this who really want to make a difference in your life. So if you need to get in touch with John O'Grady, you can reach out to me. And you want to get him to come in to speak to your team, to come in and speak to your company, we will hook you up and we will make sure you get connected. But this has been phenomenal for me, and I hope it's been as good for all the listeners out there. But John O'Grady, I want to thank you for elevating me today and for elevating all our listeners. And we really appreciate it. And please stay in touch with us for everything that we can help each other with, because this has been awesome.
Yeah, likewise, Dave. And again, you bring in this incredible group of people, accomplished people, and I'm just humbled to be part of that group and have the opportunity to share with your guests. So thanks for what you do as well.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, listen, this is the Elevate Academy, and we thank our guest today, John O'Grady, and we will see everybody on Wednesday when we have Don Saladino, who is literally the trainer to the stars. So we'll see everyone on Wednesday. Thanks again. Have a great one.